views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. As the longest government shutdown in our nation's history goes on, and the debate over wall funding and residual nasty politics grips the national dialogue in the media, left underanalyzed are the immigration policies that are at the root of the entire issue. What's the best way to improve our nation's approach to immigration? How can we stop drug smuggling, cut down on undocumented immigration, and provide a reasonable and humane path towards citizenship? Also, who are these undocumented immigrants who come to our country, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally? These are burning questions that cut to the core of the dialogue over border security. We will talk about all those issues tonight. Please join me in welcoming an associate professor in the Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service, a senior Fulbright scholar who is an expert in migration and related security policy, Dr. Marciana Popescu. Thank you so much for joining us. And from Bronx Works, an attorney who deals directly with immigrants here in the Bronx, both documented and undocumented, Arturo Lopez. Mr. Lopez, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Ms. Popescu, let's just start in general, okay? Who are the people trying to get into this country across our southern border?
Well, if you just think of the southern border, we are thinking of how they were labeled. I would start with that. So we hear a whole discourse around this issue of having terrorists or violent criminals coming in through the southern border. In reality, government data shows that this is not, in reality, the truth, right? So you do have people that are escaping situations of violence, conflict, extreme poverty, most of them being families and children, with an alarming number of unaccompanied children coming up as well. The other thing is, at the border, we actually add to the number of unaccompanied children by separating them from their families. They're coming primarily from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, but also from other countries in Central and South America.
Mm-hmm. So they come to the border. Now, what has been the history of this? This is a problem that we have had, or an issue that we've had for many, many years. How have we dealt with it in the past? Why has there been frustration over the way we've dealt with it?
If I can make a parenthesis here, we are framing this whole issue as a crisis, right? It's the crisis at the border. And maybe what we should understand is that migration is not a crisis. Migration happened historically. Walls did not stop people. I live behind the Iron Curtain, so I know it from a personal experience, right? The peak in illegal crossings, right, was in the 1990s, the end of 1990s and 2000. We see a significant drop in the number of people that come illegally crossing the border without documents. What we see most recently is that these people come in intending to apply for asylum, which by international law and also by the adherence of the United States to this international law, they are allowed to do. They are allowed to apply for asylum. Yet, under the current administration's policy provisions, we are stopping them. We are narrowing. We narrowed the venues for asylum seeking. Therefore, you see more and more people trying to find different ways to get up north, to pursue happiness, which is in our Declaration of Independence, to find safety. All of these being something that until this year, I would say until last year and this year, they found it possible in the United States. You see a drop of immigrants as we are speaking because less and less people are incentivized to come over the border.
And also I think it's clear that the rhetoric has discouraged
Yes,
some
absolutely.
from even making an attempt. You mentioned that they crossed the border. How do they, how did they cross the border? And even just to get right to the debate, wouldn't a physical barrier stop them from doing so?
It's interesting you are asking this question. Actually, this morning, there was a segment on ABC News that talked about the recent visit of President Trump to the border, and one of the border officers actually showing him how tunnels are being dug under the wall, the existing wall. So people find ways. They are coming by foot. They are finding ways to get through fences. They are coming with, documents in many cases that are not valid, and that's the reality maybe that we should talk about when we are talking about undocumented immigrants in this country. Most of them are not here by illegal crossing. Most of them are here by overstaying their visas.
We will talk about that specifically with Mr. Lopez. I want to ask you about something else that you mentioned, and that was this notion of the people who have been living in terror of one sort or another, and they seek asylum. What are the rules? You talked about international rules. What are the international rules that guide us, and have we adequately dealt with that, and have we obeyed those rules prior maybe to the last 2 years? Or has there always been kind of a gray area, and some people get in and some people don't, and how are people selected? Maybe you could examine this whole notion of seeking asylum in the United States.
It would be great if we would have much more time for that. However, the asylum laws in the United States are directly tailored by under the prescriptions by the Refugee Convention of 1951, basically saying that everybody that has a credible fear in the country they live in, and they can prove that fear, they can apply for asylum in the United States. Most of that fear is linked to political persecution, the violation of civil rights in the countries they are in, and any kind of religious persecution as well.
There could also be social situations. Many of the women that I've seen interviewed talk about, domestic violence and
Yes.
other situations in their families.
Thank you for bringing that
and
up.
that is valid as well.
Well, not anymore, because what this administration is trying to do is actually to do away with domestic violence and gang violence as grounds for asylum. However, the courts are, addressing this.
Last question for you, and then Mr. Lopez is going to join us in this dialogue. If, let's just say, I don't know, you had 4,000 people, and 3,000 of them really have legitimate reasons because they're really in bad situations in their countries. How can we, United States of America, be expected to take in 3,000 people, to process them, to find places for them, and then, of course, to track them towards citizenship? That seems like an unfair task to ask, and I think that's what some of the people are concerned about.
Yes, and this concerns comes with the over 1 million backlog of cases of asylum that we do not have the resources or did not allocate the resources to deal with. However, the United States recently withdrew from the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which aims to do exactly that, to identify ways in which we can regularize migration. We can devise mechanisms that could allow us to provide shelter for people that are really in need of shelter, and to work with other countries to address situations in their countries of origin as well.
And this was one of the among the things that has gone on in previous administrations. So they would work in Honduras or other places to try and correct, fund and provide other supports to help correct those situations.
Absolutely.
That has been, as far as I understand.
That's one way. There are multiple ways that are included in the Global Compact on Migration that we chose to withdraw from.
Mr. Lopez, who comes into your office to talk to you about their immigration issues?
Mostly it would be families, just families that are members of the community here in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. Many of them, the majority have been here for a very long time, are working to support each other and their families, children that are attending school.
What is their status? Are they documented? Are they undocumented? And then what is it that they come to you and your office and ask for?
Sure. Well, we see a large variety of cases because we provide assistance with many aspects of the immigration process, from naturalization, so someone who is here and is a legal permanent resident, to family petitions, to U visas for crime victims, for individuals who have been the victims of crime and have assisted law enforcement in the prosecution of that crime, and thus are eligible to remain in the United States legally.
In terms of the whole question of documentation and having undocumented people, do people who say, hey, I don't have papers, I'm technically here illegally, can you help me attain some sort of status? Do you see that?
I see that question every day. And the answer
I
is...
was going to say, how did I know? Okay.
Yeah. And the answer, it depends on a case-by-case basis. Every individual really needs an analysis of their particular case and the factors in their case and the situation that they are in to truly be able to determine if they're eligible. So I wouldn't be able to just sum up. The immigration process is extremely complex. There's a variety of different laws, even the process of when you qualify for something. There is a large library of different forms the government has. The individual needs to figure out which form to even fill out.
So somebody says I'm undocumented, I overstayed my visa, and so technically I could be in jeopardy of being deported. Maybe they do have a family, maybe they don't. In many cases, they do have a family. Is there anything you can do for them, or is there sometimes you say, look, good luck, I can't help you,
Right.
and you're really on your own?
Well, that scenario there, if you want a specific analysis of that scenario, someone who entered with a visa, what's considered inspected and admitted, and has a qualifying family member to petition them, could be eligible to adjust status and become a legal permanent resident in the United States.
And wouldn't they, especially the way the climate is now, wouldn't they be putting themselves in danger by simply admitting that? And then the minute they do that, all of a sudden they find a knock on the door, and the next thing they know, they've been deported back
Right.
to another country.
This current administration, as opposed to the previous administration, which had instructed enforcement to focus on people who were criminal actors, has broadened the scope and instructed enforcement to focus on anyone who may be removable. So the effect that has had, and why the courts have become even more clogged, is that as far as enforcement is concerned, someone who entered with a visa and has remained here, has a family, and is working to support that family, is seen in the same light as someone who is a hardened criminal. They're given the same priority. The previous administration instructed enforcement, obviously, I don't want you to focus on day laborers who may be undocumented but are just living here peacefully and supporting their families. I want you to focus on the people who are bringing in drugs, who are bringing in weapons, who may be assisting terrorists.
The terrible stories that have been held up to the light of somebody who's undocumented who killed a police officer, for example. I mean, this has been out there. We see it. We hear about MS-13 gang members and all that kind of thing. How common is that in terms of the undocumented people you see? Do you get, I mean, maybe they don't come in and say, hey, I'm a violent person, but do you get a sense that there is a significant criminal element in the undocumented and you're going to be next to answer a similar question?
The majority of people I see, documented or undocumented, are not criminals. They're law-abiding people with families. This concept that immigrants and aliens are criminals is to some extent perpetuated by the tactics of enforcement. For example, when it comes to MS-13, in their efforts to investigate gang members, they've created a database in which anyone who they feel or suspect, think just has any casual connection with a gang member can be entered into that database. They don't need to have that
a specific, it's almost like you don't have to be convicted in a court of law to have that
It comes
judgment
down
made.
to the beat cop thinking, I think that guy is suspicious, I'm going to enter him into the database. And all of a sudden, that high school student who maybe is in a class room with someone else who may be a gang member who he's trying to avoid and complete his studies becomes associated with MS-13.
Professor, this is a very difficult question to answer, but it's almost like weighing it. Nobody, a right-thinking, a law-abiding citizen wants to see a police officer murdered. Nobody wants to see that. How do you balance out that this happened from somebody who was undocumented, who may have slipped through the cracks, who may have slipped through a lax system, with the fact that you want to be humane? In other words, is there a way to balance that out so that we can eliminate that, but also at least treat people who are not like that in some reasonable fashion?
Yes, absolutely. I think first we really have to to dispel the myths that are out there. What actually government data shows is that when we see a spike in the number of immigrants, we also see a drop in criminal activity. And it's almost proportional when you look at the percentages of the spikes and the drops. So more immigrants in this country do not equal more crime. One. Two, I think when you are dealing with crime, and is the murder of a police officer, the other case that made the media, like it was on the media for so long, was the rape of a young woman by an undocumented
I don't think
immigrant.
anybody wants to make light of those incidents.
Oh no, absolutely. But let's keep it as they are. It's a murder and it's a rape case. It's not the immigration status that was conducive to that. What is conducive to that is the personal choice that these people did. We do have much more American citizens that are committing violent crimes than immigrants committing violent crimes. So when we can separate the two, we can also start thinking of immigration in different ways. I also think that when you're talking about immigration, we do need a reform. Our immigration policies need to be looked at. And there are two ways to do that. The current way, in which we are not alone. I mean, Europe is going the same direction, unfortunately, and we are all using securitization approaches, right? We need to secure the people within. As President Trump said 2 days or 3 days ago, right? We build a wall to secure the people within. This is not a healthy approach. The other approach is, let's really look at what migration and human mobility does good. How can we manage this? How can we create safe spaces here and abroad and work together so we can really build on the immigrant population for all the capacity that they bring into the country or in their countries of origin?
While this may be the most volatile dialogue on immigration that we've had, certainly in my lifetime that I can remember, the notion of securing our borders and a fair immigration policy has been debated
Forever.
for a very, very long time. What is wrong with the rules that we've had? And, there was a bipartisan bill, I think, that Senator McCain was part of a number of years ago. What is wrong with those rules, and how can those rules be changed? And we're going to get to you about the same question. Changed so that there is a humane approach to it. We do protect our borders, so to speak. We weed out people who may have some aspect of criminality in it, but then we're also humane about people who legitimately are seeking asylum.
I think it goes back to the nature of policy and how policy is being dealt with in this country in general. When we do have some good policies, but that they are not consistently well implemented across the board. We do need training. You have border officers that need, immigration officers that need to be trained. They need to have a fair understanding of the context from which these immigrants are coming in, right? To have a good understanding of policies and specific training on implementation so we can then measure, and here I'm getting to the other issue, we need better research, measuring what works and then building on that and measuring what, and identifying what doesn't work and then not using the policies that do not work. Also working in collaboration with other countries because we are not alone and we need to deal. This problem is here to stay. It's not a problem. I think the solution is in looking at it differently. We need to really find better ways to address it by training, by allocating the right resources, by monitoring implementation.
When we have a problem, let's just say smoking causes cancer, Okay, then a study is done, a
Yes,
full medical study
absolutely.
is done. They will take all different kinds of evidence. They'll trace it. I'm not a scientist, but there are scientists who do that. And then they'll come up and say, you know what? Nicotine is addictive and smoking causes cancer, and come up with that conclusion. Has this administration, really any administration, done a real study of what might work on the southern border, really any border in terms of immigration? I'm not aware of one that will conclusively, objectively say, here's what's going on. Do I have that right?
Yes, you're right. There is no such extended study being done. This is a very complex issue. So that, in defense of what was not being done is there. However, the Migration Policy Institute actually issues very regular reports on what is happening. More access to statistics and collaboration with researchers would actually improve the situation, I think.
Mr. Lopez, when you talk to somebody who comes to you and says, and they lay it out there, they escaped a difficult situation in their own country, now they're here and they want to apply for citizenship, they're law-abiding, they could be family people, they could be trying to hold a job, all these other things, and you find that I've got a loophole here and I can't help them. What kinds of changes to laws do you think would be useful in your work that say, if only I could have this, then I could maybe advocate a little better?
Sure. Well, one of the major issues is that individuals who come in without inspection but may qualify for some immigration benefit are then prevented from traveling outside to process in their home country and can very rarely process here. That was all sort of enacted actually by the Clinton administration, who placed a program called IRA in place, which created this sort of roadblock. They thought that would prevent people from coming in. All it did was really trap people within the U.S. and prevent them from being able to take advantage.
They couldn't stay, they couldn't go, they couldn't do anything.
Right.
And so you're saying dealing with that regulation would be useful?
It would help to create a path for citizenship to many individuals who are here in the United States, not to mention probably a large number of the people who would qualify for DACA.
How do we deal with people, if what Dr. Popescu says is true, that the majority of undocumenteds are people who overstayed their visas? Somebody comes in, gets a legitimate visa. How do we deal with the fact that they're out there somewhere, they could be living with relatives, and they've overstayed their visa? How do we do that? Can there be a tracking system? I mean, I don't know that we want to start putting trackers on their ankles and things like we do with criminals, but what can we do about that? If that in fact is, as she says, is the problem, how do we deal with that?
Sure. Well, that I don't believe that's somewhere we should be going, where we're physically tracking individuals.
No, well, I was just thinking about people on probation and all those
Right.
kinds of, they're
Right.
remanded to
Right.
their
Right.
their
Well,
homes.
the vast majority of visas are tourism, and if you think about ratios, in terms of the amount of people that travel to the United States and the percentage of those that actually remain here, the percentage is very small.
Yes.
So that's something that needs to be taken into account. And something else that I think needs to be understood about visas is they're not distributed equally. It depends on where you come from. There are certain countries that really do not even have to apply for a tourist visa. They can literally show up at the airport and come in. There are some countries
Presumably Canada, for example.
Yeah, Canadians can just show up at the border. Other countries, Mexico for example, you would have to apply for a tourist visa, and it's issued at the discretion of the officer. So basically, if they just don't feel like you should be a tourist in the United States, they'll just deny it.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but because we are running out of time. The drug smuggling, as I understand it, my own reading and research shows that drugs are not coming through like people carrying them, sneaking across the border. They're really being smuggled in through trucks and other way through legal ports. That you understand that to be true?
Absolutely.
So
When we
it's
are
not a case where those people are bringing drugs into the country.
Absolutely. When you're talking about large quantities, definitely that's the situation. So really investing in technology and better devices through which we can monitor transportation across the border would be much more logical and would make much more sense than really trying to stop people that are trying to find refuge here and come with a proper asylum case.
We're just about out of time. Both sides that have caused this shutdown, you can call it Democrats and Republicans, you can call it whatever you want, but the two sides are like this. And there are many who, on the Democratic side, who are saying we want to invest in the technology, we want to invest in these kinds of things that you're talking about. And of course, President Trump and on the other side, they're saying, gotta have the wall. Is there a compromise solution, or are we in a situation where somebody's going to win big and somebody's going to lose big? And somehow I think that's not going to play. You've got a Democrat-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate. We know where the president stands. So I'm asking you to negotiate a deal here for us that'll work. Please.
And that's my personal opinion.
We
We
know
are
that.
in a political crisis right now, right? We made this issue a political issue, yet there are human lives involved. America was known as the country that really thinks about human rights, protects individuals. We are not seen as such anymore. I came back from Europe where I was asked questions such as, how come you cage children? We do have over 3,000 teens in a camp at the
You mean
border.
when you were in Europe, they asked you about that?
Yes. Recently, in my most recent visit about a month ago, we already lost. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican, it doesn't matter. We lost as a country in front of the world. We are dealing with a humanitarian crisis, yes, absolutely. But more than that, we are dealing with a crisis of identity. And I think we should ask ourselves...
American identity.
Absolutely. We should ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? Because clearly, we'll have to redefine ourselves. Can we address immigration issues? Absolutely. But we have to move away from a political conundrum and into really looking at what makes sense for American safety, for immigrant safety, for American identity to really reclaim itself for the goods in it.
Mr. Lopez, real quickly, maybe 15 seconds, characterize the people and what are your hopes? Do you always try to get them to become citizens and educate them about the rules?
Yes, our sincerest hope is that everyone who is eligible and comes to us can be assisted with a naturalization application, and that afterward they can take full advantage of that and vote.
I'll ultimately get there. Arturo Lopez from Bronx Works, thank you so much for your great work in the Bronx, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And Dr. Marciana Popescu, thank you so much for joining us. Say hello to all our friends at Fordham University.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments, and everybody wants to comment on this stuff, on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. We thank our producer, Helen Greenberg. The two directors are William Guzman and Nick Marrero. And next week, we got a really cool show about Bronx photography, a whole other different point of view. Very unique photographs underscoring a very important Bronx issue. So check it out next week on Bronx Talk. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Stay there.
Thank you.